بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا، أنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا، إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. أسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يجعل نياتنا خالصة لوجهه الكريم. I praise Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. I thank Allah Ta'ala. I ask Allah to raise the rank and the honor and the esteem of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his family and his companions, and all of those who follow them in excellence until the day of judgment. I ask Allah to grant us the sincere intentions. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Insha'Allah ta'ala, we're going to discuss an important aspect of the religion which Sayyidina al-Imam al-Haddad mentioned in this treatise, Risalat al-Mu'awwana. And it is important because it is something in our communities, especially in the African American communities and also in the immigrant communities, but not as detrimental as it has been in the African American communities, is the point that Imam al-Haddad raises here in this section on page number 38. After talking about sticking to the book, Al-Quran and the Sunnah, Sayyidina al-Imam al-Haddad radiallahu ta'ala anhu mentions how that is done. Now you have a command that we read. Allah. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولو الأمر منكم فإن تنازعتم في شيء فردوه إلى الله والرسول إن كنتم تؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر ذلك خير وأحسن تأويلا. And Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala mentioned, O you who believe, obey Allah and obey the messenger and those in authority among you. And if you differ in anything, then refer it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger. And this is better for you, best for you, in the most excellent way if you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the last day. This verse gives us a command from Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala to follow the book of Allah. And this is in Surah 4, verse number 59. And to follow the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And here, there is also something that follows that when it is when it coincides with the book of the Sunnah. It is obeying those in authority. Ulul amri minkum. Now, this concept of authority, of leadership, is extremely important. If I could point to one of the factors that is extremely destructive in our masajid, in our communities around the country, It would be the absence of following qualified. Oh my God. Is it clear? Is the voice clear? Or is that the individual cannot hear? Can everyone hear me? اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. مفروض. Okay. Sorry. Bismillah. The voice should be clear now, right? It should be clear, inshallah. طيب. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in this verse, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasul. O you who believe, obey Allah and the Messenger, wa ulil amri minkum, and those in authority among you. So when we read in the Quran, and this is in Surah number 4, verse number 59, I want all of you, Surah 4, verse number 59, I want all of you to read that verse, to think about it. Imam al-Haddad mentioned it as a principal verse telling you the importance of following or sticking to the book and the sunnah. But also, one needs to follow some form of authority. What has happened in our communities is authority is missing. The idea of someone who is an authority over others, who is going to guide others how to properly follow the book and the sunnah is almost absent. People think they don't have to follow. They don't have to listen to others. And listening to others is a part of following the book and the sunnah. Extremely important point that we need to understand. Despite being a leader or an imam, still there are those who are in authority over us, right? So when it comes to Islamic knowledge, even though we know some things, there are learned people who are more knowledgeable than us who help us understand the book and the sunnah, right? It is not for us, when we don't know things, to just do what we feel or do what we like. That's in contradicting to the book and the sunnah. Nor is it our responsibility, even if we can understand Arabic, even if we have books, to make our own religious rulings. This is not permissible, right? And this should be understood well. So after giving us this command and telling us how it's important, Imam al-Haddad goes in, Imam al-Haddad goes in and he says, know that not everyone is capable of independently evaluating all of his affairs, outward and inward, against the book and the sunnah. He gives us a warning. And by saying that, he's telling us that no one without guidance can weigh all of their matters, whether it is their matters of the heart or matters of their outward practice or matters in dealing with transactions among the creation. Not everyone has the ability without someone guiding them to do that by yourself. That means that all of us are going to have recourse to scholarship, right? To learned people. Imam al-Haddad, he said, for only erudite scholars can do this. Should one ever find difficulty doing so, go to those whom Allah commanded you have recourse in His saying, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلِ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. So this is an important aspect that we need to know. And all of this is an indication that there is scholarship and then there is common people, right? You have al-ulama and you have al-awam, right? And whenever you don't distinguish between the two, you're going to make mistakes. What do I mean? In Islam, when we're talking about following, you have two classes basically of people. And I'm going to spend a little time on this, maybe the next couple of days, because it's extremely important. So I'm going to expound on this point at Imam al-Haddad in the next two chapters. This chapter and the chapter following it, for us, I believe, are very essential, extremely important. So you have a class called al-ulama, the scholars. And then you have a class called al-awam, the common people, the lay people, right? That's in general. Al-ulama are those who learn the knowledge of the religion and apply it in their lives, right? So we call them al-ulama ul-amilun, those scholars who practice their knowledge. These are the scholars that Imam, let me see my voice again. I don't know. Oh, okay. Now the voice should be clear, right? I'm sorry for, I don't know what's going on with the voice. So you have scholars that are practices. So when Imam al-Ghazali radiallahu ta'ala anhu mentioned the ulama, he mentioned those who practice and strive towards the akhirah. So this is the ulama we're talking about, right? So you have ulama and you have al-awam, common people. All of us, everyone listening, are among the common people, including myself. And all of us should write that in our, or instill that in our mind, right? We're all common people. None of us are ulama. None of us. Now, because this term scholarship is used so loosely, and I think it's problematic. So what we need to do is define scholarship. What is scholarship, right? What is scholarship? Scholarship in Islam has technical meanings according to sciences, right? And now I'm going to lay out in some way the difference of scholars, right? When you're talking about a scholar, there are some bare minimum requirements. For Islamic studies, I'm talking about. And I'm going to go bare minimum at the beginning, and I'm going to build upon that. So that we all kind of humble ourselves. And that way we'll be able to build a community. So at minimum, for a scholar, I'm not talking about a common Muslim, I'm talking about a scholar, you must be fluent in the Arabic language. Absolutely. If the person does not know well the Arabic language, there is no way they will be a scholar. You understand what I mean? Follow what I'm saying. That's a condition. Meaning, what do I mean by a condition? Without it, you cannot fulfill that position. It's a condition for that position. that you have to know Arabic language. If you don't know Arabic language, and I mean you're fluent in the Arabic language, you cannot be a scholar. Now, let me soften that blow, because some people, what do you mean if you don't know Arabic, you can't be a scholar? Just what I said. If you don't know Arabic, you're not a scholar, right? Now, that's not to be offensive. Why do I say that? Because the book and the Sunnah is in the Arabic language, not a translation, right? The book and the Sunnah, which we're obligated to follow if we obey Allah, meaning the Quran, and we obey the Messenger, meaning his Sunnah, the original Quran and Sunnah, which is the Quran and Sunnah, is in the Arabic language. That should be understood. Anything other than that is a translation of the meanings that a translator understood from the Quran and the Sunnah. Do y'all follow that? I hope that's clear. So that means even me, I read this book, right? And y'all sat with us as I read your translation, and you saw multiple times, and that translator is a great translator, better than me. But there are times when you hear me come back and correct the translation, right? You hear that often. We're reading the book, and as I'm listening to the translation, I'm listening to our reader, Sayyidi Wali, read, and I say, oh, stop, that translation is wrong, right? And then I'll go to the original and I retranslate it. Or sometimes the translation is too literal and it's conveying the wrong meaning, right? That's having access to the Arabic text and having some knowledge of Arabic. And I'm talking about, in my case, some knowledge of Arabic. That's not scholarly enough. You need to be fluent and a master of the Arabic language. It's extremely important, right? Why? Because if you only know one meaning, if you know Arabic and you only know one meaning, then that one meaning you know may not be the meaning that is intended in the verse. And the sole reason that you make a mistake is because your understanding of the meanings of Arabic words is only limited. So therefore you misunderstand. That's just from Arabic. Now, one of the great Arabic linguists, his name was Khalil ibn Ahmed. Khalil ibn Ahmed. Curiosity. Does anyone know who Khalil ibn Ahmed was? Is anyone familiar with that name? Just curiosity. He was famous, a famous scholar. Who was his main student? That's why I asked you if you're familiar with him. Does anyone know? I do ask questions sometimes. Y'all get to ask me some. I'm going to ask you some. Right? Anyone knows Khalil ibn Ahmed? I'll wait. Who was his student? Who was his main student? We got a lot of people in here. Come on. Are you online? I know somebody know this answer. I know somebody would be smart enough to just go to Google and find out, right? Right? At least y'all learning, don't rely on Google, huh? But this time you might need it. So I got a bunch of no's. Come on, give me some yeses. We got ulama. Scholars should know this stuff. Ha 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 ha. Aywa, ya Sayyidi. Abdul Rahman, you are correct. Khalil ibn Ahmed, he said that's Ahmed's son. Farouk, you should be a comedian. MashaAllah. Khalil ibn Ahmed was the sheikh of Sibawayh. Sibawayh, he was like almost considered the father of Arabic language. And he wasn't an Arab, so don't think it's an Arab praise. Sibawayh was not an Arab. And he's considered like the father of the Arabic language, a master, right? Right? So Khalil ibn Ahmed, he was the sheikh of Sibawayh. Sibawayh is known as the father of Arabic language. So when you want to know Arabic, it's like Sibawayh said that. Okay, I put Allah. And I cannot see anything. Right? So Sibawayh, he was considered the father of the Arabic language, right? Khalil ibn Ahmed was his teacher, his sheikh. And Khalil ibn Ahmed, he said a strong statement. And this statement is probably going to shock most of you, but this is how they look at it. He said, whoever does not know Arabic does not know Islam. Woof, that's a strong statement. Whoever does not know Arabic does not know Islam. Now, when you hear that first, you may be like, what? That's a strong statement. What does he mean by that? Meaning that without the Arabic language, you're always going to have gaps in your understanding of the religion. That doesn't mean you can't know the basics, you can't know how to pray and to know how to fast, but we're talking about the rules, and all of the rules of the religion, you're going to be missing a lot of information solely because you don't know Arabic. And this is just a fact. So that's a condition. So if one of us want to know, am I a scholar or not, one of the things that can disqualify you of that is how well do you know the Arabic language, right? That doesn't make you feel bad. That just lets you know I'm not a scholar. That's all I'm saying. That doesn't mean you can't be a good Muslim. It doesn't mean you can't go to paradise. None of that is entailed. That's just a condition for scholarship. That doesn't mean the scholar is better than you. We're just talking about the knowledge aspect of it, right? The knowledge aspect, to be a scholar, you have to have some grasp of the Arabic language. And an authority in it, right? And this is what those great scholars of the language have mentioned. Secondly, that's one condition. That's not it. If we're talking about rulings of the Quran and rulings of the Hadith, you need to have a firm grasp of the verses of rulings in the Quran and the verse in the Hadith that relate to rulings, al-ahkam. You need to have a grasp of that. And if we're talking about the level of deducing rulings, that's another story, since we all go to the Quran and Sunnah and make up our own rules. Many times people do that. You need to know all of the verses in the Quran that relate to rulings and all of the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ that relate to rulings. So at minimum, we would expect that you know at least 500 hadith and at least 500 verses of the Quran. At minimum. At minimum. This is not all. At minimum. So, and you need to know that explicitly where they're at and what's the intent of those verses and those hadith. So if we want to wipe out scholarship, and that's a bare minimum of knowledge, and I'm not talking about the multiple chains of transmission for those hadith that have rulings. We're talking about just a minimum amount of knowledge, right? And I want to show you how difficult that is. Sometimes you have people who are hafiz of Quran. They memorize the whole Quran, and they couldn't tell you the difference between hadiths, verses of rulings, verses of stories, or verses of beliefs. They couldn't tell you the difference. They just memorize the words, but they know nothing what it contains. So even the one could be a hafiz of Quran and don't fit that description, right? That means that person, even though they memorized the whole Quran, they couldn't tell you which verses relate to rulings and which one don't. Most of the Hafaz are like that. They memorized the whole Quran, but they couldn't tell you not what it means. Tell me which verse relates to rulings and which ones don't. They couldn't do it. This is not a criticism. I just want to show you the level of scholarship. Okay, let's move on. That the scholar, he must know which verses are abrogating and which verses are abrogated. Which hadith are abrogating and which hadith are abrogated. You heard that? What do I mean? He needs to know that there are some verses in the Quran that they're in the Quran, but the ruling, so the wording is in there, the verse, but the ruling, the application of the ruling is abrogated. That ruling is abrogated by another verse in the Quran. So if you don't know this, you may read the Quran and read a verse and apply a ruling that is abrogated by another verse that you're not aware of. That not only you may be aware of the verse, but you don't know that this verse came to abrogate that verse. So the ruling is the verse that's the abrogating verse. You can't apply the abrogated ruling. Likewise, in the hadith of the Prophet is the same thing, right? So that's abrogating and abrogating. We'll come to examples of that, inshallah, but I want you to get on this list. And it's not an exhaustive list. There's way more. I'm just giving you some things that you can easily remember and distinguish between classes of people. You must know which verse are absolute and which verse are restricted, right? Some verses, they can be understood absolutely as it is, and some verses, their ruling is restricted by other things, other verses, right? You need to distinguish. They're not abrogated, but if you can't take this without understanding the restriction related to it, right? So some verses is just as it is, absolute. You can understand it as it is and apply it. Then other verses, their verse outwardly is absolute, but is restricted by something else. And you need to know both, right? There are verses that are general, and there are verses that are specific. So you need to distinguish which verse is of general applicability and which verse are specific in their applicability. That's with the Quran, right? Move to the Hadith is a whole nother field which gets wider. You need to be able to distinguish the scholar we're talking about. Right. Restricted means there are certain things that apply for the applicability of the verse. So it's not just absolute, it's restricted by other things. And this is another field of study, right? Does anyone know what this field of study is in Islamic studies, what I'm talking about? When I'm mentioning all these things, In which science do I find the details of this knowledge? Does anyone know? Which field of study, with all these things I'm mentioning about these types of verses, where would I find this type of information? In which field of study? Sometimes things are known by their opposite, right? Usul al-fiqh. Exactly, Sayyidi Muhammad. See, that's why Usul al-fiqh, the foundations of fiqh. That's how I knew you were a great scholar, Muhammad. MashaAllah. Right? Usul al-fiqh. So the foundations of fiqh, not fiqh. Fiqh is different from usul al-fiqh, right? Now, so that's in Quranic verses and things, right? So the science you will learn about these in detail is usul al-fiqh, the science of foundations of al-fiqh. Not in al-fiqh itself. It's two different sciences. You have usul al-fiqh and you have al-fiqh, two different things, right? So that's in the Quran. Now let's go to hadith. We're talking about the scholar. And now I ain't talking about levels of scholars. I'm going to talk about that too. But I'm just talking about just a base level scholar to have some knowledge of some stuff, to distinguish. This one's a scholar, this one's not, right? Because if we don't have, I hear all the time people saying, oh, we got, this one's a scholar. And that's because we don't have no definition of what a scholar is. So if a person got a PhD, we automatically think he's a scholar. And that's false. That is totally false. PhD don't mean scholar. PhD is nowhere near a scholar, right? Because we don't know what a scholar is. So we think, man, he got a PhD. And sometimes, no, let's not deviate. Don't get me started on PhDs and master's degrees and all that other stuff, right? I'm gonna leave that alone, right? That's another discussion. I'm gonna leave that right there. Let's park that, right? Anyway, so in hadith, and this is not even a summary of what the qualifications are. This is just some highlight points, right? In hadith, that person who's a scholar is going to need to be able to distinguish between a rigorously authenticated hadith, a sound hadith, a weak hadith, and a fabricated hadith. Those four categories, he's going to need to know the difference and how and why. Why is that important? Because if he's going to extract rulings, he needs to understand what is an evidence from the Sunnah and what is not. So if he cannot distinguish between a rigorously authentic hadith, sahih, and a sound hadith, hasan, or a weak hadith, da'if, or a fabricated hadith, mawdu', he doesn't know the difference and how to determine the difference. There's no way he can use as proof the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, because he reads hadith books. No hadith book, original book, is having for every hadith its level of authenticity. That's the job of a scholar to determine that, right? So which hadith is used for a ruling, he got to be able to distinguish that. He cannot distinguish that without that information. He cannot do that, right? He cannot distinguish the levels of authenticity, he or she, right, without knowing the level of narrators of hadith. So in other words, that person needs to know the science of narrators of hadith, because every hadith has a text and a chain, and the chain is filled with men and narrators and women, right? So he needs to know the levels and the reliability or the trustworthiness and accuracy of the narrators. So they got to know narrators. So if they don't know narrators, there is no way they're going to weigh and determine authenticity of a hadith. So when someone comes to you and says, this hadith is weak, this one is this one is that, and my first question is, how you know? You know, I've learned you that hadith is da'if, a da'if hadith, right? A da'if hadith. How do you know that hadith is weak? By what? And you know what they mean by that? Al-Albani said is weak. Okay, and that means what? Right? Al-Albani made so many mistakes in considering something weak and so many errors in this area. That's not a proof. How do you know it's weak? Based on what? And even if we said that Al-Albani said it, why did he say it's weak? We're talking about scholars here. We're not talking about common people, right? So let us, from that, that's just giving you an idea. I think that examples that I gave, most of all of us would realize what? That we're not scholars. Am I right or wrong? Can we have an agreement that we're not scholars? And if we understand that, we'll listen to what Imam al-Haddad says, that since know that not everyone is capable of independently evaluating all of his affairs, outward and inward, against the book and the sunnah, for only erudite scholars can do this. Should you ever find difficulty in doing so, go to one of those to whom Allah commanded you have recourse in his saying, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Selena, you're funny. I have 3 master's degrees in secular education. May Allah reward you. Could you please one day come give a class with our people on the importance of higher education? And let's sit down and have a discussion on that. Don't undermine the importance of your secular education. Our people, our communities need to be pushed to this as well. It's an aspect that we're failing miserably in, and that's why we're suffering in support and growth in our communities, because we don't have a lot of educated people who can get careers, who can start businesses, who have the secular education that's needed to function in the world. So don't belittle that. So that is important. That's not to be belittled. However, when it comes to Islamic knowledge, as you can see, grab your seat in the little chair and learn, right? But that education is important, and we need sessions on that. Seriously, we need to see Muslims who have achieved high in secular education, because it's important. It's very important in community development. Don't underestimate it, seriously. And I would never make someone feel that because you don't have a lot of Islamic knowledge, that the knowledge you have is not essential. It is important. Without it, we're going to be in trouble no matter how much Islamic knowledge we got. We got to take care of both the deen and the dunya. So we need both. So let's not forget that. I mean, so I got your point, but I just had to emphasize that because I don't want the wrong message to go out. So my point is scholarship, right? So for us, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلِ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. Now, with that understanding, we got scholar, we got common person. We distinguish scholarship. I'm going to give you a joke. It's not a joke. It's not a joke, but one time, the the title of scholarship is just given out too fast, right? We were in the masjid, and our community is predominantly an African American community, right? So they have this Darul Uloom, these like uh, schools in the subcontinent, and this is not an attack on them, but I'm just being honest. And they give the title of Mufti and Sheikh so fast. Guy graduates from 6 years of study, 7 years of study, 8, 9, whatever. And next thing you know, he's Mufti, Sheikh, scholar, right? And so one of them came to the masjid, a young Pakistani kid, and no offense to Pakistanis, but he comes and, he's walking and he brings this guy, he got on his turban and he says, this man is the Sheikh of Hadith, right? And a Mufti. And what was meant by that is you get out the way and let him lead. This was so funny, right? So I said, really? So we're all sitting. Now we study. We're not scholars, but we study, right? And we sit with teachers. We sat with scholars. So we know the difference from gold and copper, right? But okay, let's entertain ourselves. So he comes and he says, yes. And the person's pointing to the guy. He walks in. He's got his little strut and he's ready to take over the masjid. I mean, you can see it in his eyes, even if he's only there for 2 weeks. But for 2 weeks, he's going to be Sheikh al-Islam in the masjid. He's a scholar of hadith, and he's, the big muhaddith. I said, oh, really? So he comes, I said, assalamu alaikum, and we're sitting with the students, myself and our students, right? So we're sitting, and he's talking. And I knew there was just all claims, but, we're entertained, and he's talking, and right? So I start to question him. Just, you Shaykh al-Islam and Hadith, mashallah. You're the great Hadith scholar, and you're a Mufti, and blah, 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 blah. And he said, I studied this, and I studied this, and he's going, and we studied the 6 books, and right, and this and this. So you know what I said to him? He didn't expect it. I caught him so off guard. I said, could you please tell me the first Hadith in Al-Bukhari and the chain of narrations? Just from Bukhari, not from yourself. Just give me the sanad in Al-Bukhari, back to the Prophet, and the first Hadith. And he looked at me, his eyes got about this big, right? And I was looking, I was like, answer. He's talking about he's a Hadith scholar. He couldn't even tell me the first Hadith in Bukhari with his chain of narrators. How are you a scholar of Hadith? That's the most authentic book after the book of Allah, and you can't even tell me the first Hadith. But you're a scholar of Hadith. Explain yourself, O Sheikh. And he was sitting there. You should have saw him. Really? We don't study like that. I said, oh, so you're not a scholar of Hadith. Sit down and learn. And not to be arrogant, but that was arrogant, walking in the masjid and assuming you Shaykh al-Islam, and you're deceiving people. Humble yourself, right? But the idea was, I'm coming to this black community and I'm going to, do my thing. No, you're not here, right? Hadith scholar. So he say he couldn't remember the first, not remember, he didn't even know, the first Hadith in Bukhari. The first Hadith. But you're a scholar of Hadith. You know. And this is the same concept. If you study Hadith, you should have this knowledge. This should be easy, like sipping the coffee for a person who's a scholar of Hadith. You know what one of our teachers said? He's a scholar of Hadith. He said, we memorize Bukhari, meaning the scholars of Hadith. We memorize Al-Bukhari like one of you memorized Al-Fatiha. He said, we memorize Sahih al-Bukhari like one of you remember al-Fatiha. Wow. Right? That's a scholar. We memorize al-Fatiha, al-Bukhari, like one of you memorize al-Fatiha. And alhamdulillah, we've had the blessing to sit in sessions of those scholars of hadith, and they would be running al-Bukhari, at-Tirmidhi with no book. And the students would be making mistakes and they would be correcting them from their mind and reading from the mind. No book, nothing. With chains of narrations, if you mess up a name, they're going to correct you. Pronounce a vowel wrong, they're going to correct you. This is with the hadith. I'm not talking about the Quran, with the hadith. These are scholars. There's a big difference. So that's part of the lesson. Time goes so fast. Tomorrow, I'm going to share more of the lesson, right? Because this point is extremely important in understanding what we need to do. If we don't fix this idea that everybody's a scholar, that everyone follows Quran and Sunnah, and everyone can do what they want, we're going to destroy our communities, especially in knowledge, right? And the idea to do that was what those innovators in Islam intended to do from within. They got everyone thinking, and so for that, let's stop another thing. Stop this sheikh stuff, right? Seriously, I want to help us. Stop calling everybody sheikh. Sheikh, 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 sheikh. What will happen if you stop doing that? You'll have a greater appreciation for a real sheikh when they come. It's not about egos, right? I am not a sheikh, right? Call me Imam of the Mosque, fine. Call me Brother Amin, won't bother me none. But don't call me sheikh. I'm not a sheikh. Right? Because I don't want you say Sheikh Amin, and then when a real sheikh comes, you don't respect that sheikh at his level because you think everybody's a sheikh. That's the problem. It's a big problem. So now we have a problem distinguishing between levels of learned people because we give everybody the same title. And it goes in the back of your mind that they're all equal, right? They're all equal, and they're not all equal. قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Say, are those who know equal to those who do not know? They're not equal. They're not the same, right? And this is not to put anyone down. It's just to put everybody in their place so that we can build. But this idea that, like, I'll give you one. Someone comes the other day, not the other day, it was a week or two ago, maybe a week or two, maybe it was a week ago, maybe 2 weeks, I don't remember, but it was close. Someone asked me a question, I gave them the answer, and they're around a bunch of these Quran and Sunnah people, right? And they tell us, give me your proof. I said, huh? I said, give me your proof, which means give me a verse of Quran and give me a hadith. And I said, I gave you the ruling. If you want the evidence, you should go find it. Here's the ruling. And I said, and if you don't like the ruling, you can follow them. And you don't have to call me at all, right? Why did I say that? First of all, the person who asked me for a proof don't even know what a proof is. Said, give me a proof. You don't even know what a proof is in Islam. So what are you asking? You're a parrot. You're listening to those ignorant people who don't know what a proof is either, right? Right? We don't know what a proof is. So that's number one. You don't know what a proof. Number two, you don't know how to extract rulings from a proof. So because someone gives you a verse of the Quran or hadith, that in itself is not a proof. Did you extract it correctly? Is that the meaning that led you to that ruling? This is not your business. This is not your place. Your place is to learn the rules. And then after you learn the rules, Then you go into learning evidences and how scholars derived and extracted rulings from the essential primary sources. That's not your position. You are a common person. Really, 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 we should understand that. You go read a book of fiqh, you don't have a bunch of evidences for the rulings. That's not how it works. Evidences are the position of scholars. Rules are the position of common people. When you go to real study, then you go and learn evidences and proofs. And when you learn evidences and proof, you'll have a greater appreciation for the rules. You will realize your position. Extremely important. So from that, everybody, all of us need to follow a madhab. Every single one of us. It is obligatory upon us to follow a madhab, a school of thought. So anyone in here who has the opinion that I don't follow a school of thought, I just follow Quran and Sunnah, you are deluded. And you need to work on fixing that delusion. And I just gave you reasons why. It is extremely important because that ends up playing with the religion in ignorance, right? Not that you want to. The nature of your pursuit will lead you to make a mockery of this religion. And that's what's happening. We're making a mockery of the sacred law. And we should be careful. Imam al-Haddad reached that high level of scholarship, and despite that, he still followed a madhab. In his case, the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i. So I'll open up for questions. That's one point. This is a vast topic, but I wanted to, because here, the next two things we're going to go into, this chapter and the end of this chapter and the next chapter are essential things that I believe can help our communities if we get them right. I'll open up for questions, inshallah. Barakallahu bikum. Sallallahu alayhi wa Muhammad wa ajma'in. Let me go back if there was questions. So now you know why we say I don't know, right? Because we're not scholars. We're not even learning people. We're teaching by necessity. The first lesson my teacher taught me was when he said, go teach, because we were authorized to teach, right? We didn't just go teach because we thought we was knowledgeable. No, someone said, I authorize you to go teach this, right? You are qualified to teach this. You are qualified to teach this. So we went and taught after being authorized. And we weren't authorized till we were trained in that which we're teaching, right? That doesn't mean we won't make mistakes. But in general, we were instructed, we were taught, we were checked, we were tested to make sure we know the information that we're conveying, right? And then we were authorized to go teach. But the first thing they taught us when they allowed us to go teach, remember, you are a teacher by necessity. The only reason you're teaching is because there are no scholars available to do the job. Had there been scholars, you would be sitting as a student. Never forget this case. And we never forgot that. We are teachers by necessity. There are not scholars here in our environment. We have to spread the knowledge. So we do the best we can with proper learning and authorization from more qualified people than us. And we fulfill the necessity. And when the people of knowledge are available, we sit down and we learn. We never begin to think that we are somebody. We are teachers by necessity. All of us are sinners. So if a person quits following lecture because he's a sinner, then I guess none of us will be here because all of us are sinners, right? All of us commit sins. I would tell a person, don't stop the lecture, repent and stop sinning. And if you sin again, repent and stop sinning. Repent and stop sinning till Allah protects you from sinning. The requirements of a sheikh, and when I say sheikh, let's use the term. When I use sheikh in terms of rules, what I think most people understand from sheikh, I understand from that a qualified legal scholar, right? That's what I think when they say sheikh. Or if they say a sheikh in a specific area, right? But when you use the term sheikh, for me, what I understand Islamically is a qualified legal scholar, right? That's what I expect. Unless you say he's a sheikh in hadith, he's a sheikh in tasawwuf, he's a sheikh in Arabic language, then the requirements will differ. So when you say sheikh, first thing you need to understand, what type of sheikh? You are sheikh in what, right? And if he says I'm a sheikh in everything, run, right? It's what, right? So what are you a sheikh in, right? Are you a sheikh in hadith? Are you a sheikh in fiqh? Are you a sheikh in usul al-fiqh? Are you a sheikh in tafsir? Are you a sheikh in tasawwuf? You're a sheikh. What are you a sheikh in, right? So that's important. So the term sheikh, or are you just an old man and you sheikh? Or you are an aspiring student and you're meant by that sheikh talibul ilm. Maybe that's what you mean. What do you mean? That's when anybody by sheikh. Like that man, he said he was a sheikh in hadith. He wasn't even a beginner student in hadith, but he got the title sheikh al hadith. So he wasn't a sheikh of hadith, but is this a claim? So the requirements of a sheikh is what field that person is a sheikh in, and then we go to that field and what must be met in that field. But if no one's a sheikh of everything, no, nobody. No one claimed that who is a real sheikh, that I know everything. No, that's impossible. So it depends what we're talking about when we talk about sheikh. But no, for sure, none of us are sheikhs. So alhamdulillah, we can stop that. Ya ayyuhal insanu ma garraka bi rabbika al-kareem. The meaning of that verse is what has deluded you from your Lord, your generous Lord. And what was highlighted in the class was delusions, that people see things other than their reality, right? So the dunya can be a source of delusion. Knowledge can be a source of delusion. And all of those delusions will block you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is what is meant. And that's what I was saying when I used the verse, talking about the aspect of delusion. What is delusion? To see things other than their reality. In other words, delusion is a common person thinking he's a scholar or thinking he's a sheikh. And that's a delusion. That's not real. And what's going to happen when they do that? They're going to be deceived from their Lord. They're going to be blocked from Allah. They're going to miss the target. Why? They're deluded. So that's the point of delusion. How do we choose a school of thought? Can we have a lesson on the topic of selecting a school of thought? We can, but in general, you follow a trustworthy teacher who follows a school that you can learn the basic rules of the religion from them. That's how you choose, right? Not one's better than the other among the four established Sunni schools of law. You follow a teacher who is able to teach you the rules of the religion according to a school in a proper way with a chain of narration from themselves to the followers, the leader of that school, like Abu Hanifa or Malik or Shafi. So once that system is in place, if you have someone available to teach you that from A to Z, all of the rules of fiqh, then you follow that school, right? That's simple. Not because one's better than another. You got to have someone who can teach you the school, what is available to you. That's how mostly everyone chooses a school. Is it possible that people say they only follow Quran and Sunnah because they don't know the four schools, they have not researched it? Yeah, and that's what's being told to people. So the person just doesn't know, right? That doesn't make them right. That means they don't know and they need to learn. And it's our job to learn and teach, right? Because we have a certain problem. Because of the default Wahhabi position in our society, that's what people hear. I follow Quran and Sunnah. That's what they hear. That's what they repeat. That's what's spread. They don't know nothing about 4 schools. That's bid'ah to them. That's blind following. They don't know. They have no idea. They know nothing about Islamic scholarship. So therefore, they need to be taught. Because if, as I just explained to you, Quran and Sunnah, what you need to know it, we know the average person can't do that. Like Imam Haddad said. So it's not even, once you learn, that stuff's not even like, you know how hard that is? That is extremely difficult. That's not an easy job to follow Quran and Sunnah by yourself. That's almost impossible. Once you know what Quran and Sunnah is, the sheer amount of material, people don't even have the intellectual capacity for that. I'm telling you, they don't. Our minds are not like that no more. Right? That's hard. That's not easy. I'll give you an example. I'm going to show you example. How many of us have memorized 5 books in anything? 5 books, at least 300 pages or more. Raise your hand. Or just say yes. I would like to meet you. How many of us has memorized at least 5 books, 300 pages or more? Is anyone in here done that? 5 complete books, at least 300 pages or more. I don't care in anything. Don't have to be just religion. In anything. Any science. We got 3 masters, PhDs in here, doctors. How many of us have memorized at least 5 books, 300 pages or more? Anyone? Any takers? And that's not arrogance. I really want to know our level of learning. Do we got anyone like that? In anything. I don't care what it is. Dr. Seuss books. I mean, I'm joking. I don't care. It doesn't matter. No one? No, don't be shy. If you did it, tell me. Seriously. 5 books, 300 pages or more you've memorized. Nope, nope, nope. My family is in here and they all have master's degrees. And I know they ain't did it, right? And they all have master's degrees. So I know they all got 1 master's degree and none of them have done that. So I'm assuming that's the norm because they're all specialists in their fields of secular education, right? So no, 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 no. All right. If you don't memorize, you're not even considered even a beginner student in Islam. If you don't memorize books, you're not even a beginner, period. You're not a beginner. And I know you ain't memorized that. You probably didn't even memorize the 360 questions. You're funny. No, seriously. When we were studying, I'm be honest with you, our teachers, they didn't even consider if we didn't have the books memorized. Period. We couldn't even have a book until we memorized the book. Literally. We sit down and we had to be memorized and we were tested. What did you memorize? The book. Finish it, complete it, memorize. People don't study like that no more. Seriously. This was the norm, and it's still the norm in Islamic circles, memorization. If you don't memorize, you can't talk. You don't know. You're guessing. That's why you don't have nothing in your mind. You're guessing. You have to memorize. So the books that we're studying have to be memorized. And that's why they used to make summaries. Summaries, mukhtasarat, they are summaries so you can memorize them. And that's why they had poems. Books were memorized. You had to memorize. If you don't have nothing in your mind, They said ilm fi sudur la fi sutur. Knowledge is what's contained in your heart, not in the pages of books. What did you memorize? And in hadith science, if you don't memorize, you're not taken serious. You're not taken serious at all. Right? So that gives us the idea. I don't know how I got off on that. But serious, we're trying to move the level. When we start studying, let me explain to you. When we start studying, after we get through this internet phase and we're back in the masajid and we're learning, everybody knows when you sit in our classes, you got to memorize. You got to put something in your head, right? You have to memorize. That doesn't mean you can't learn if you don't memorize. You can learn. But we talking about serious students, they got to memorize. They got to have something in their minds. We can't sit around guessing. We have to know. And when you memorize, you're able to be at the first stage of learning, memorization. I don't know what humility is when people say that. Humility is important, but let me explain how the Prophet ﷺ explained humility. He explained by its opposite, which is arrogance. Arrogance is to reject the truth when it comes to you and to look down on other people. So humility is the opposite, to accept the truth when it comes to you, even if it's bitter, and to not look down on others. Right? So that's important. And I think if you learn knowledge, automatically you're going to be humble because knowledge itself will put you down. If you learn, it will put you down. What I mean, put you down, it will show you your rank. And arrogance develops when you think you're bigger than you are. So knowledge, when you learn, the more you learn, the more you'll put yourself down in humbleness because you'll realize how much you don't know. Right? So I get worried when I hear someone, and I'm not saying that's your case, when people mix up confidence and knowledge with arrogance. They're not the same, right? Sometimes we push humility to the extent that it means we don't do. La humbleness, you should be more of a worker. Do the scholars keep reviewing the books to remember them, or at a certain point does the book just stick to one's memory? No, they keep memorizing over and over and over again all the time. So they may read one book 70, 80, 100 times. They'll read it with themselves. They'll read it with themselves. They'll read it with others. They'll study with teachers. Right? They'll review over and over. So like this book, minimum of 3 times you would read it, right? That's a minimum. Our teacher said whoever hasn't read a book 3 times, I mean studied it, has never read the book at all. So at minimum, 3 reviews, the basic text, explanation, then more details and evidences. Minimum of 3. Average time you're going to read a book in your career, probably 20, 30 times, right? Because every time there's new students, you're going to do the book over, right? You're going to be reviewing in the book at different levels, right? So you'll go to sheikhs and they'll be teaching a basic book that they'll still be teaching it. They'll still be memorizing it. That's how it sticks. And repeating, there is a benefit. You'll keep memorizing. Practice and knowledge is 2 different things. Knowledge is one aspect, and practice is the fruit of knowledge, right? But in order to practice, you got to have knowledge. So that's the first requisite, right? So that's one requisite. Now, that don't mean, when I say it don't mean nothing, if you don't practice, that's a problem, but it doesn't negate the importance of knowledge, right? So practicing the knowledge is essential. But because you don't practice, don't negate the fact that you know, right? So we got to join both, right? You got to learn and you got to practice, right? But don't leave off learning because you don't practice, right? You still got to learn. That's a condition because you can't practice without knowledge. You have to practice and learn and practice. Both got to be combined. But you can't leave off knowledge, never. Even if you don't practice, you have to learn. And then you have to practice. May Allah make us people who practice our knowledge. And I don't want no one to think that any of this applies to me. I'm in the same boat as everyone else. And because I know that boat and I know the holes in it, I'm telling you, don't leave all these holes in your boat. You're going to drown, right? Start patching these holes so that we can make it to shore. But the idea that we're going to make it to shore without knowing the direction and not having the knowledge, we're not. We're going to drown. And we want to fix that. Is that it? Okay. No, just keep making repentance and hang around people who don't smoke. Get around someone who's not sinning so much. Keep the company of people who don't struggle with the stuff you struggle with. That will help you get over it. Hang around people who are better than you. That will help you get rid of the sin. I'll give you an example. If I ever get cocky and think I know some stuff, all I got to do is go hang with Sheikh Samir and I'll get humbled real quick. It's quick cure. Whenever I think I know some stuff, all I got to do is go sit in a session with Sheikh Samir and I'll really quickly realize how much I don't know. Humble me right overnight. Not long, right? Why? Because he'll see the difference between scholarship and a common person quick, right? If you think you're a basketball star, go play with someone who's a real basketball star and you'll know you don't know how to play. That's playground stuff. This is a real... I had a friend, right? Let me show you a story. He was a business partner of mine. Maybe you don't know him, right? Some of you who know basketball may know him. His name was Tariq Abdul-Wahad. He used to play for the Dallas Mavericks, Denver Nuggets. He was the first French Muslim player in the NBA, right? It's my friend, right? So we used to do business together, travel all around the world, right? And when we would just be relaxing, he used to sit the bench. He might not like me saying that. So we would be teasing him. Oh, you a bench warmer, right? He was a star at one time, but you know, he got older and he get older. Them young guys was, you know, having more legs than him. But anyway, right? So we used to mess with him, right? So we would want to go play basketball, right? He said, I don't play with bums, right? I don't want to get hurt. And you know, we played basketball, so we was kind of insulted by that. Like, because I was a basketball player, and my other partner, he was a basketball player. We used to play ball in school, right? So he said, I don't play with bums, right? And right? So we went on the court one day. And I'm telling you, this guy was shooting three-pointers like they was layups, right? And he don't play a lot in the game. He was shooting three-pointers like they were layups. And it was mentioned that a bum don't excuse the strong words, a bench warmer, right, in the NBA is a superstar anywhere else. Keep that in mind. A bench warmer in the NBA is a superstar other places. And when we watched him shoot those shots like that, woof, he could go on a playground and look like Michael Jordan, right? But there's levels to this. That was just the point. There's levels, right? There's levels. So if you want to know your level, you want to humble yourself, go around people who are far better than you. And I'll tell you another joking story. These are just funny stories about this, and they're not religious. He was rich, a millionaire, right? Multi-millionaire. He had a huge contract in the NBA, one of them mega contracts. So, you know, we used to be living good rolling around. He had a lot of money all over the world, France, Saudi Arabia, just having a ball, right? We went to Saudi Arabia one time to do a business deal. And there is this big company that handles all fashion in the Middle East. So we were with the owners. This owner, his son, he was like 21 years old, Saudi, like 21, 22. He himself owned so much stuff. He had a mall. I don't know if you've been to these malls in Saudi Arabia, that the mall was a restaurant, restaurants, grocery store, and fashion store, like fashion, like a regular mall, and a racetrack with race cars on top. And he took his money, his worth, made that millionaire look like he was broke. And you can see the difference in humbleness between this level and that level. It was funny, but like I'm just saying, everything got levels. And this is dunya I'm talking about. So scholarship is the same thing. There's levels, right? There's levels to everything. So if you want to know your level, just look at someone that's above your level, right? That will humble you. And then if you ever get feeling low, look people below you and realize the favor of Allah upon you. So you don't get arrogant, look at people who are far better than you. And so you don't forget the favors of Allah upon you, look at those who are below you in status. And this way you'll stay balanced. Because even if someone is better than you, there are people who have far less than you. So don't forget Allah's favors upon you. So even if you're not a scholar, you still got a lot because Allah favored you with Islam, and some people are not Muslim. So that's a big favor. So you're not a scholar, but you're a Muslim, right? And then there are some people, you know how to pray. Some Muslims, they don't know how to pray. They didn't learn to pray. So that's a level. So don't forget Allah's favors upon you. Don't look at yourself, I ain't here, so I'm low. La, you are still having ni'mah from Allah, and don't forget it. All right, I spent a lot of time talking about a lot of things, but I hope y'all got my point. You know what I mean? Really, we have to revive a reverence and a respect for scholarship. In order to do that, we have to know our places, right? And then we'll build stronger, knowledgeable communities. It takes time, right? But remember, there are groups that are pushing this idea that's going to destroy Islamic scholarship. The idea that every common person can do whatever they want. So I warn you against this. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. بارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.